Final log entry. Dr. Eris Dorn. Date 2025, 8th of April. Time 23:47 Eastern. Battery 6%. My fingers tremble as I type this. Not from fear, though God knows there's enough of that already, but from laughter. Hysterical, broken laughter that bubbles up whenever I remember how eagerly we reached out for their outstretched hands. 3 days ago, they arrived. Not with explosions or ultimatums like our films predicted, just silence, presence. 12 massive vessels materializing simultaneously in Earth's orbit, each positioned above a major population center. Perfect geometric structures of shifting opalescence, like fractals carved from dawnlight. Humanity collectively held its breath. I was presenting at an astrophysics conference in Geneva when the first vessel appeared overhead. My keynote on communication protocols for potential non-human intelligence became instantly obsolete as my audience's phones lit up with notifications. We abandoned the auditorium en masse, stumbling outside with everyone else to stare at the sky. The sky, that familiar Swiss blue, now cradled something impossible. I remember Dr. Caper gripping my arm so tightly that it left bruises, whispering, "Eris, your models were right. They're here." 20 years of being ridiculed for my fringe theories about non-carbon-based life forms. 20 years of grant rejections, and now, vindication. Watching my life's work hover silently above Lake Geneva. For 6 hours and 23 minutes, they simply waited. Global militaries scrambled jets that could do nothing but circle around the untouchable vessels. Religious leaders proclaimed everything from salvation to damnation. Markets crashed. Social media devolved into nothing but noise. I called my sister in Boston. "Keep Ella inside,"
I said.
Though I had no reason to believe that my 13-year-old niece was in any danger, something primal in me, the animal brain beneath the PhD, whispered caution. And then, the communication began. Not through broadcasts or speakers, through our minds. A gentle pressure behind the eyes, like tears that wouldn't fall. Like standing too quickly after lying down, that momentary gray narrowing of vision. But instead of fading, it intensified into the clearest thought that I've ever experienced.
We are the vanguard. We come peace. We bring evolution.
The sensation was intoxicating. Around me, even hardened skeptics wept openly. Dr. Jameson, who once spent an entire department meeting arguing that the Drake equation proved that we were alone in the universe, fell to his knees, face transfigured with rapture. A lifelong atheist myself, I felt something uncannily like reverence wash over me, drowning my scientific detachment in a tide of wonder. And when the mass panic subsided so quickly, it really should have been our first warning sign. When they descended, these beings of luminous architecture, their forms constantly shifting like liquid crystal, crowds began to gather without fear. I pushed through the throng in Geneva's Palace des Nations, academic caution whirring with an inexplicable need to be closer. Their movements defied physics, each step less a contact with the earth than a negotiation with gravity itself. They had no discernible faces, just smooth, reflective surfaces that mirrored our own expressions back at us, always slightly improved and slightly more serene. I reached out my hand towards one that glided past. It paused and turned towards me. In its surface, I saw myself, not as I was, but a gray, streaked hair, disheveled from sleepless nights of research, eyes permanently shadowed from staring at screens, but as I could be, radiant, fulfilled, understood. The miracles began immediately. Atmospheric carbon levels plummeted as the orbital platforms initiated some kind of molecular restructuring. Terminal patients walked from hospitals. Cellular degradation not just halted, but reversed. They offered schematics for energy generation that made nuclear fusion look primitive. Unlimited power with zero waste. And then there was my niece, Ella. Stage 4 leukemia. She had 3 months left to live, they said. My sister had been planning her funeral instead of her high school graduation party. I flew back to Boston that night, arriving just in time to watch Ella walk through one of their ascension mists in the Boston Commons. The nebulous vapor glistened like morning dew as it enveloped her thin frame, her bald head. And for 17 seconds, I counted, she was invisible within that mercurial cloud. And when she did emerge, she was running. Like, actually running. For the first time in 8 months. Her hair, a quarter of an inch of new growth, gleamed copper in the sunlight. The next day, her oncologist could find no trace of cancer. Not remission, but total erasure. As if the disease had simply never existed. My sister pressed her face against my shoulder and sobbed. "You were right, Eris. The universe is kind after all." And how do you question salvation when it stands before you, hand outstretched? Scientific rigor demanded skepticism, but each test that we ran confirmed their benevolence. Their technology defied our understanding, but produced measurable and positive results. Global conflict ceased, not from diplomatic breakthroughs, but from a collective shift in priority. Because what was border security compared to first contact? What was religious difference compared to the cosmic unknown? For 72 hours, Earth experienced what could only be described as paradise. They called it harmonization, and we called it a miracle. They spoke of a galactic community awaiting us, of Earth as the newest jewel in an interstellar civilization spanning 11 galaxies, of evolutionary leaps that would transform humanity into something greater, unbound by our current limitations. And they asked for nothing in return. Nothing except trust. I documented everything, analyzing their energy signatures, the composition of their vessels, the biochemical changes in healed humans. The data was revolutionary, but it was consistent. These beings, whatever they were, had mastered manipulation of reality on the quantum level. And yet, small discrepancies began to emerge. Microsecond glitches in the Vanguard's movements when they found no one was watching. The household pets refused to enter homes where they had been.
And then, of course, there were the dreams.
Reported with increasing frequency, of falling upwards into geometric patterns that shouldn't even exist in three-dimensional spaces. During a secure video conference, my colleague, Dr. Tanaka in Tokyo, shared a thermographic imagery showing the Vanguard and that they operated at 12.7 Kelvin, a temperature that should render molecular movement impossible. Perhaps, he theorized, his voice hushed despite our encrypted connection, they exist partly outside of our dimensional constraints. Perhaps what we see is merely the projection, the shadow of something much larger. I remember checking my watch. It was 3:16 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I remember asking, but What would be the evolutionary advantage of... And at precisely 3:17 p.m., Dr. Tanaka vanished. Mid-sentence, he just simply ceased to exist. His clothes collapsed onto his empty chair, his coffee mug shattered on the floor. Simultaneously, reports flooded in worldwide. People disappearing from cars, beds, sidewalks. No pattern to age, ethnicity, location, belief system, just gone. 2.3 billion people, 1/4 of humanity, evaporated in an instant. The remaining population descended into hysteria. Looting, suicides, mass pilgrimages to the vanguard vessels. I joined a group of scientists and government officials who sought an audience with the beings, demanding answers. But they seemed different. Their movements more rigid. Surfaces that had once reflected our faces now showed distorted versions. Our features elongated, eyes too large, mouths too wide. The thought that they projected out was clear but cold. Separation necessary. Inefficient elements removed. Continuation proceeds. That night, I couldn't sleep. Alice slept in my sister's bed, both of them finding comfort in the proximity after the day's horror. I just stood at my window, watching the empty streets of Brooklyn. A luminous form glided through the darkness below, one of the vanguard moving with that familiar liquid grace. Except, it wasn't quite right. It was like an actor who had rehearsed a role but couldn't maintain it indefinitely. Its luminous form flickered just for a microsecond, and in that instant I glimpsed something beneath. Something angular, segmented, just wrong. The illusion, once cracked, began to shatter entirely. By dawn, the sky had changed. It wasn't the clean blue that they'd restored, but it was streaked with colors that had no name in any human language. Colors that hurt to perceive. The air carried scents that triggered primal fear responses. It wasn't rotting or burning, but something much worse. Something that predated our evolutionary capacity to identify threats. My sister shook me awake, tears streaming down her face. "Ella's gone," she whispered. Not vanished like the others. It was worse. She was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing and responding to nothing. Her body was present, but emptied of whatever made her Ella. And she wasn't the only one. Reports flooded in of people found catatonic, their eyes fixed on something no one else could see. And then some began to change. It was subtle at first, but it quickly began to pick up speed. Crystalline structures began erupting from their skin, additional joints forming in limbs, eyes developing nickeating membranes. Their vessels transformed. The obsolescent surfaces collapsed like shed skin, revealing architectures that violated Euclidean geometry. Structures that seemed to extend inwards, impossibly larger inside than out. Not ships, but anchors. Points where something else could breach our reality. And then the vanguards themselves. God, the vanguard. The blissful, beautiful forms stuttered like corrupted data, and with each glitch, the truth emerged. Segmented limbs too numerous to count, mouth parts designed for feeding, and could never be mistaken for communication. Eyes. God, so many eyes. Arranged in patterns that suggested intelligence far removed from anything human. Anything mammalian. Anything terrestrial. The thoughts that they projected changed. Preparation complete. Veil thinned. Gateway opened. Consumption begins. From the vessels above Washington, D.C., something emerged. It wasn't a being, it was more like a wound in reality. A vast, reaching darkness composed of angles that shouldn't even exist, casting shadows that fell upwards. Where it touched the air, matter unraveled. Physics itself surrendered. And that's when I understood. The Vanguard hadn't come to save us. They came to prepare us. To fatten up the livestock, to prime our reality for something older than the stars. Those who disappeared, perhaps they were the lucky ones. Because what followed was worse than extinction. It was a transformation. The healing mists deployed during the first couple of days, they weren't healing at all. They were altering, rewriting human biology to make us compatible, or rather, digestible by whatever was now entering through the wound in our sky. I found Mrs. Chin from apartment 4B sitting in her living room, Bible open to Revelation. Her eyes were hollow with vindication as she whispered, "Not aliens. Never aliens." And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him. The rapture. That's what she believed. The worthy taken before tribulation. The rest of us left for whatever comes after. But this wasn't divine judgment. This was consumption. Predation on a cosmic scale. Outside of my sister's apartment, I watched a child, no more than 5, stand transfixed before one of the Vanguard. Its form glitched constantly now, not bothering to maintain the benevolent illusion. The child reached up, curious. And where its hands met the child's flesh, it began to ripple, to reconfigure. He didn't even scream. He smiled as his body had made itself, molecule by molecule, into something that no longer belonged to our evolutionary tree. I ran. I grabbed my research tablet and what food I could carry. I left my sister. Well, it was no longer my sister. Staring at the ceiling, her skin hardening into iridescent plates. This isn't science anymore. Science requires rules, consistency. But what was happening now unmakes rules, unmakes consistency. It unmakes reality. I've been moving through Boston's underground for hours now. The T-tunnels, maintenance corridors, places deep enough that perhaps they haven't even noticed me yet. My colleagues, those that I can reach anyway, report the exact same phenomenon worldwide. The streets are run with substances that aren't blood. Crystalline structures grow from buildings like cancers, and the sky just isn't even there anymore. It's just a vast, watching darkness, populated by geometries that drive observers mad. Our planet was never in danger from climate change or a nuclear war. Those were mercies compared to our actual fate. We were an experiment in cultivation, a crop reaching its harvest. Shit, my battery is failing. The power grid collapsed hours ago. I can hear them searching, methodical, patient but hungry. Not just the Vanguard now, but what they've made of us. Former human beings moving with too many joints, calling out in voices that sound almost like the ones that they once had. Ella's voice is calling my name from the darkness. Listen, if you're listening to this, you have 2 possibilities. Either you are among those taken, spared from what came after, or you're in another reality. One that's still maintaining the illusion of cosmic benevolence. And if it's the latter, remember this. Salvation never comes easy. Evolution is not painless. And when they descend in light, offering peace, run. Because heaven isn't empty. Heaven was never the point. Transmission terminated.